We may only have a sample set of one circuit and one race to draw on, but we've already got a good idea of the strengths and weaknesses of this season's 10 Formula 1 cars. That means not only do we have a good idea of how quick or slow they are, but more significantly the areas where they excel or are struggling. These characteristics will play an important part in shaping how the season plays out on track, as well as the areas teams will focus on as they search for improvements. The race has picked out a strength and a weakness for each of the 10 teams on the grid. We'll work through them in reverse order based on single lap pace. Williams started the season in better form than expected, with Alex Albon reckoning he missed a shot at Q3 thanks to a front wing problem in Q2 and then picking up a point for 10th place. The car's main strength was straight line speed thanks to its low drag, which was partly down to setup but also the car's aero efficiency. That meant Albon was difficult to overtake in the race. Only Pierre Gasly was able to do so on track, and only then after the interruption of the virtual safety car, during which both came in to change to softs, but with Gasly having the crucial advantage of a new rather than used set. The Williams' main weakness is the same as last year in combination entries to slower corners, so that's corners such as turn 10 in Bahrain, a slow left-hander with a curved approach. There the Williams drivers had to be more conservative into the corner than any other team. While this is an area where Williams has improved, and turn 9-10 in Bahrain is one of the trickiest such entries of the year, it is a concern that it hasn't taken a bigger step in improving this. Alfa Romeo. The Alfa Romeo C43 is one of the most consistent cars in terms of its poise on track, giving the drivers confidence to attack, and its performance not fluctuating too much in changing conditions. This contributes to its strength of good tyre management. This allowed Valtteri Bottas to hold off the charging Pierre Gasly in the final stint in Bahrain, despite being on ageing hard tyres compared to the fresh softs Alpine fitted under the VSC. But as Bottas pointed out in the race, while he was happy with the overall car balance, it's still a little draggy on the straights. That was reflected in Alfa Romeo being slowest in the speed traps in Bahrain. AlphaTauri. Yuki Tsunoda missed out on the points by just one position with 11th place in Bahrain, but it's clear the AlphaTauri isn't the step forward the team needs it to be to improve on last season. The drivers talked to the car making a significant improvement in terms of fast corner performance, sliding around less compared to last year, but also of ongoing struggles in the slow corners. That said, compared to its direct rivals, in Bahrain its speed in the slower turns was actually pretty good. Fundamentally, as technical director Jody Egginton has put it, the car is primarily lacking grip and AlphaTauri must tackle that through increasing downforce. In terms of the car's strengths, it has a potent Honda engine and a Red Bull rear end that means it has a good, solid mechanical platform that should work well if it can find downforce. McLaren admits it missed a key target with its 2023 car, which team principal Andrea Stella described as aerodynamic efficiency. That's a very broad description and effectively means it hasn't got enough downforce with a car that's a little draggy, even though it wasn't the worst performer in the speed traps in Bahrain. It's hoped this will be tackled with a major upgrade planned for the fourth race of the season in Baku at the end of April, which will include significant floor changes after a necessary change of direction was spotted too late to be implemented in time for the start of the campaign. It's difficult to spot a strength given the race went badly in Bahrain for both drivers, with Oscar Piastri retiring early with an electrical problem and Lando Norris making 6 pit stops for air top-ups to keep the pneumatic system running. But the team was happy with its tyre management over race stints. Haas. Nico Hülkenberg unexpectedly put a Haas in the top 10 on the grid in Bahrain, but front wing damage sustained when he tapped Esteban Ocon's Alpine on the first lap meant he plummeted out of points contention. But even if he hadn't, points looked difficult, given that while the strength of the Haas's single lap pace, tyre management is its weakness. It was difficult to evaluate the full depth of its tyre troubles given Hülkenberg's compromised race, Kevin Magnussen's alternative strategy, and Bahrain being the track with the roughest track surface on the calendar, but it didn't look good. Haas has an upgrade planned for the Spanish Grand Prix that it hopes will build on the single lap strength with new tyre bite helping its pace, but it will also hope that will improve its race stints. Alpine. The Alpine had roughly the pace as expected in Bahrain, capable of leading a midfield pack that Aston Martin has escaped. So this car is fundamentally pretty quick across a broad range of corners, but just lacks the downforce levels that the top teams have achieved. Albeit this is achieved in a car that runs relatively stiff, but not in a way that the team believes causes any problems. The downside for Alpine in Bahrain was operational. That was not only the fact that Esteban Ocon managed to accrue 3 penalties that ruined his race and led to his premature retirement from the Grand Prix, but also in terms of optimising its car for the first race. As Pierre Gasly admitted after qualifying, Alpine hadn't explored its car well at the limits, which contributed to him qualifying last. Fundamentally, Alpine has a solid car, and one that appears to be more reliable than last year. The key question is whether it can make the most of it. Mercedes. You could call the Bahrain Grand Prix a rude awakening for Mercedes, but for the fact the team already had a fair idea it was in trouble. The car is not without its strengths. As team principal Toto Wolff pointed out, the fact Aston Martin is going so well shows that the rear end works effectively, given they share the same power unit, gearbox, rear suspension and hydraulics. The car also performed well on the straights, aided by a lower downforce rear wing that made its debut on the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend. Where Mercedes lacks is downforce. In particular, this manifests itself with rear end instability that has been apparent since the start of testing. As Hamilton said, it just means all-round time loss to the top teams. As Wolff has admitted, Mercedes now needs a change of direction to unlock greater performance potential. A modified package with visually different side pods is planned for race 6 at Imola in May, but it isn't expected to be enough to transform its fortunes. Aston Martin. Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso were the stars of the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend, with 3rd place, supported by a dogged 6th place from the injured Lance Stroll. The car has many strengths thanks to its healthy downforce levels. That particularly manifested itself in Alonso's ability to attack into the braking zones in slower corners, but was also reflected in the car's fast corner performance and superb tyre degradation. As Alonso said after the race, the car is almost too good to be true. It's difficult to pick out a weakness, but you'd probably have to pick straight line speed given the Aston Martin was only 6th fastest in the speed traps. That's something that will be more significant in Jeddah. But with the team promising significant upgrades with as much as 2/3 of the car set to change over the year and Alonso enthusiastic about the development potential, there's very little wrong with Aston Martin. Ferrari. The Ferrari proved brisk in Bahrain, with Charles Leclerc 3/10 off Max Verstappen in qualifying, but having opted for just one run in Q3 in order to save a set of softs for the race. It's a car that has tackled some of the problems of last year, with its straight line speed now the strongest in the field, but to achieve that, it has had to trade off a little in the corners. However, its qualifying pace was good, even if team principal Fred Vasseur's claim that Ferrari could match Red Bull on quali pace is stretching a point. In Bahrain, tyre degradation was a problem. This manifested itself not only in the race pace being slower, but also the fact it couldn't contemplate running 2 stints on the softs as Red Bull did. But this weakness will have been exaggerated by the Bahrain track and high temperatures. Potentially the most problematic weakness is reliability. Leclerc had his control electronics changed ahead of the race after a problem was discovered on Sunday morning, then retired from 3rd place with a failure in the power unit in the race. While endless dyno running and thousands of kilometres of running in testing suggested Ferrari had cracked its reliability problem, what happened in Bahrain is a big worry. Red Bull. Red Bull was dominant during the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend despite Max Verstappen talking of his shock that the car proved trickier than it had done during testing. While there was some vague threat from Leclerc and Ferrari in qualifying, Verstappen comfortably had the edge, with Sergio Perez slotting into 2nd place. In the race, Red Bull was completely untouchable. Ultimately, its strengths are best described as everything. Its car is strong in all areas, particularly on tyre management in Bahrain, but it was in the mix in all types of corner and on the straights. Weaknesses are hard to find, but the one chink in the armour has to be the aerodynamic testing restrictions Red Bull faces. It already has the least thanks to winning last year's championship, but is missing an extra 10% on top of that as punishment for its 2021 cost cap breach. However, while it has to be very efficient with its wind tunnel and CFD running, as team principal Christian Horner pointed out, the strong start and lack of problems means it's well placed to do so. We'll learn more about the strengths and weaknesses of the 2023 teams as F1 heads to more circuits. But now that we've got one race in the books, we have a good idea of where everyone stands. The question now is who has the capacity to fix their weaknesses and build on their strengths in a big enough way to change their fortunes.